Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We're very excited that you could join us today. Before we get started, we definitely want to make sure that we acknowledge our land acknowledge statement, and I wanted to make sure that we okay, wow, I'm tongue-tied today. I'm going to read part of our land acknowledgement statement, and you can find this on our soon on our department website. But we within the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at Florida State University acknowledge that our university is located on the indigenous lands of the Appalachian Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Miccosukee Tribe of Florida, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. We highlight and pay respect to this history because we understand how the state of Florida and Florida State University came to be settled on these lands. We recognize this land as scarred with a painful past of enslavement, settler colonial violence, and the desolation of culture, and the forced removal of indigenous bodies. Despite this, we respect the cultural and ceremonial practices these indigenous nations maintain in and around Tallahassee today. As educators, we honor the knowledge of these tribes and their people and acknowledge that indigenous students, faculty, and administrators are vital to Florida State University. We embrace the decolonization of our educational system and commit to disrupting suppressive systems through the explorations of many truths and lived experiences and creating room for those who are often excluded by harmful colonial erasures in our practice and our pedagogy. And I think our statement actually sets the tone quite well for the session that we're having today with Dr. Kakali Bhattacharya. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Bhattacharya. And my students know, my students on my research team know that I'm a fangirl. I am definitely one of Dr. Kakali's biggest fans. And what I appreciate most about her and her work is how thoughtful and intentional she is in this work and how she brings her full self to this work. And I think that that's a great way of living and approaching our work. And hopefully you're able to bring your full self to the work that you're doing while you're here with us. So our session today is on positionality and the role of positionality in research and how research is not a value-free endeavor. And so Dr. Kakali will share with us a little bit more about her views on this. And the session is going to be interactive. So we ask that you unmute yourself and ask questions, drop comments or thoughts in the chat. And let's make this a conversation amongst us so that we can continue to grow and learn from each other. Dr. Bhattacharya is a professor of research, evaluation, and measurement at the University of Florida. Down the street, you know, Gatorland. We won't play up the you know, that she's down there at that other university. We'll forgive her for that. But Dr. Bhattacharya also is the 2018 winner of AERA's Mid-Career Scholar of Color Award and the 2018 winner of AERA's Mentoring Award from Division G, The Social Context of Education. Her co-authored text with Kent Gillen, Power, Race, and Higher Education, a Cross-Cultural Parallel Narrative, has won a 2017 Outstanding Publication Award from AERA and a 2018 Outstanding Book Award from the International Congress of Qualitative Research. She is recognized by Diverse Magazine as one of the top 25 women in higher education. Welcome, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you, and I'm so honored to be here. Thank you everyone for coming. I prefer to interact with people more than talking because I don't want to do a TED Talk. So if your circumstances allow, then please stay on camera. If not, I totally understand. But just to kind of get an idea of who I am here in community with, would you just put in the chat if you're a faculty or a student or a research scientist, just so that I know like how the group has formed? That would be really helpful for me, because then I don't want to be saying things to you that you might already know. So I'm going to see the chat and see how it's kind of faculty. Okay. Okay. This is great. Second year faculty, PhD student, doctoral candidate, higher ed, doc student. Okay, excellent. D students, Christopher, faculty member, doctoral candidate, first year doctoral students, PhD student. Excellent, excellent. Doctoral administrator, Sophia said she's a faculty administrator. Excellent, excellent. Third year doc student, ed policy and eval, doctoral candidate. Excellent, excellent. So it seems to me that we have a good mix of faculty and doctoral students. So I'll keep the pitching in the middle range. But if I'm saying something and you have a question, feel free to ask the question on voice or in chat. If it's in chat, then please, Dr. Bertrand, alert me. If I am not seeing the chat, then I will pause and come see the chat. It's more important to me to be responsive to you than to just throw one-way didactic lecture at you. So please make sure you ask anything that comes up for you when it comes up. You don't have to wait till the end, although there'll be time in the end, but please, thank you, Caroline, for sharing that. Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to start sharing the screen, and I have learned a new feature in Zoom, which is advanced feature, so I can only share like a portion of the screen instead of you seeing all my windows open and whatnot. Let me make sure it's there we go. Are you all able to see my screen? Are you all able to see my screen? Okay, excellent. All right. Okay, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk to you about human inquiry is not free from human influence. That is the thesis of my presentation. And as intuitive as it sounds, it's not that intuitive, because we get questions asked all the time. We get questions asked about, like, why are we doing this? Is this just your opinion? What kind of verification measures do you have? Do you have triangulation? Do you have inter-rater reliability? All sorts of questions. And some of you might come to a place of pause with those questions, and I want to be able to answer and maybe even give you some suggestions for how to respond to those questions if those are questions that come up for you. One other thing that I want to emphasize over here is that sometimes when I do work and I mentor faculty in doing qualitative research and bringing their whole self into doing qualitative research. So when I mentor faculty, and sometimes graduate students too, but mostly when I mentor faculty, they would say like, oh, you can do this work because you have tenure. And so that gives you some flexibility, some freedom to do the work that you want to do. So let me tell you something, before I even get into the conversation about everything else. Yes, sometimes tenure does offer a little bit of freedom, but if you're going to wait till tenure and you have a dissertation that you're doing that is fully compromised because you're waiting till tenure, then you have like 6 years of academic and scholarly work and you put all your labor in and you're like, oh, when I get to tenure, I'm going to do this. You will be so fatigued by the time you come to tenure that you're not going to always have the energy to restart a research agenda that is really lined up with you. And why would you? Like, what's the point of putting all your energy and labor into doing work when no one's guaranteed a tomorrow? Like, we live in COVID land right now. We don't know if we can all live for the next milestone, So since none of us are guaranteed a tomorrow, I would say live the life and the work that you want to do today that means something to you, and to have a boundary of understanding of what you're not going to cross. So if you're a doctoral student, of course you're going to have a boundary, because yes, there are people that are going to inform you and guide you and move you, but you need to know in your mind what is the boundary that no one should be able to cross. This is absolutely important skill to learn as a doc student. And the reason you want to learn that is because once you are out in a faculty zone, no one advocates for you. You have to advocate. You have to understand self-advocacy, and so the importance of understanding self-advocacy is how you know how to set up boundaries and how to stand up for those boundaries. And that's the reason why I would say don't wait till tenure. I did the work I wanted to do in the dissertation. And then of course it's a reflection of the committee's influence on it, but there were certain things that I was not going to cross, like I was not going to compromise on. And that doesn't mean I'm inflexible. It just means like I'm doing the work. I know who I'm doing the work for. Definitely not the committee. I'm doing the work for the generation of scholars that are coming after. I'm doing the work for the participants and the narratives that I want to share from the participants. So I have a clear understanding of that. So then anything that goes into complete compromising of that, I will advocate and say, no, that makes my work vulnerable to this type of criticism. So I just want to sort of like underscore that as we get started, that this isn't something that I am speaking just because I have tenure or just because I've won awards. This is something that I held dear even as a doc student. So please don't have distance from your position to mine, based on where I'm at. And if you're a doc student, realize that this is doable even at a doc student level. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there so that you don't think like, oh, I'm inspired, but now I get to do this other work over here, Okay. Find me online if you want to have conversations with me. Find me online. You can even hashtag Qual Love during this talk into the world of the interwebs if you want. And I have my Facebook and Twitter and Instagram there. My game is okay in Facebook and Twitter, not so much in Instagram. I just play with Instagram puzzles. But if you want to hang out with me there, please come hang out with me there as well. Okay, so what I want to first start with positionality, the question that comes up with positionality is bias. That is the question that comes up. What is the question of bias that comes up? People go like, well, you are doing this research, you're the researcher, you have bias. That's why you're just getting the people you want to get to tell you what they want to tell you. So you have bias. And so I want to kind of unpack this, and then I want to get you into the conversation. So bias, the construct of bias comes from the understanding that quantitative researchers hold about research. So there are certain words that are obviously words in English that have English meanings. And then in the world of research methodology, they have technical methodological meanings too. So bias is one of those words, generalizability is one of those words, effect is one of those words, power quantitatively has a different meaning. These are words that have very specific methodological meanings. So when people say you have bias, if you're familiar with the research methodology world, then you would hear it differently versus if you are not. If you're familiar with the research methodology world, then you'll know that in quantitative world and in quantitative research, the understanding and the purpose of that kind of inquiry is to approximate truth and generalize and predict truth. That's what the work of that area and that group is. In order to do that, they try to have some random selection. They then try to, collect some information. They then try to analyze the information. And then they then try to say that what they found is more than coincidence, and they are 95% confident about it, and they're willing to be wrong five out of 100 times to have egg on their faces. If you are in medicine, they'll be like, no, 5 out of 100 wrong, there's too much lawsuits. We are willing to be wrong, like, maybe like 1 out of 1,000 times, less lawsuits. So these are shared understandings that we have, cultivated. But bias in these constructs are not just what the researcher's personal views are. Bias in this construct could be instrumentation bias, could be participant selection bias, could be historical bias, could be item bias. There are, so any of these bias means that it moves you away from this truth that you're trying to capture. And usually they're trying to capture one truth to see if it can be generalized across a group of population. And so that's, so for them, any kind of deviation, any kind of distraction from getting to that truth that they want to get to is not good, is undesirable. It's what makes the study weak. However, that does not apply to qualitative research. Even if you want to say, and so a lot of sometimes people would replace bias with subjectivity to say, well, I have subjectivity. So I want to say everybody has subjectivity. If you are in a quantitative world, it's not that you're suddenly free of any subjectivity. If you are in a qualitative world, of course, you're not free of subjectivity. And that's the thesis. Like, how would, nobody can claim that the human inquiry is devoid of human influence? And this was found by hard scientists. So Neil Bohr has done an experiment of, an observer effect on a particle, and then created an uncertainty principle and got a Nobel Prize for it. So this isn't new information that I'm giving you. Even hard scientists know this, so, and they don't know this to appease qualitative researchers, is that if they were to claim anything extra, then they would be losing credibility amongst their peers. So they have to account for their uncertainty in a space like physical laws and physical movement of atomic particles. And so the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is that there isn't a zone that is free of human influence if human beings are conducting inquiry. To claim that is intellectually dishonest. And no one should claim like I had no value, I was completely detached from it. You have some value. You have the value of, acquiring a degree. You have the value of making a publication. There is something there. You have investment brings value, you know and so what I want to say is that in qualitative research, the philosophies of inquiry that we inform ourselves with, you know, usually rests on understanding that there are multiple different ways in which truth can be understood, known, described, explained, represented. And these are context dependent. That means that somebody in Florida experiencing COVID is very different from folks in New Zealand, where the case of COVID went down to 0, and now it's only n=1 in New Zealand at the moment. And I have colleagues in New Zealand who are saying people are freaking out. People are freaking out with their n=1 COVID because they don't know where this COVID person is. And they're wondering, could they be in the grocery store? Would they have taken a flight? Could they have been in this bathroom? They are freaking out with n=1, because they don't want it. And we're in Florida. It's a little messed up in Florida with the incidences. So in qualitative research, we would understand the context that generates certain truths, certain experiences, and we would want to understand it from people who are experiencing it. So if it's not us and we are working with other folks that are experiencing it, we will want to know from them what is it like to live in those spaces, those experiences on the daily. And in order to do that, they would have to figure out how to build a relationship with you. So this is where I want your participation, so I can, pause and drink and see where your head is at. So what I'm interested in knowing now is that if somebody were to ask you questions that would require you to reveal things that are confidential in nature, which is usually qualitative research, qualitative researchers offer confidentiality to their participants. So if at some point you are a participant and you're participating in a qualitative research where you are going to share information, or you're being asked to share information that's confidential that you normally don't share, what would you need from the researcher to be able to trust them? What would you need from the researcher? So pop and chat your comments. I'm going to stop sharing because then I can see everybody's faces. You know, what would you need from the researcher so that you'd be able to share confidential information with them when they're interviewing you?
Hi, this is Adrienne Jackson. I'm sorry, I'm driving. I'm on the turnpike, so I can't turn on my camera.
That's okay.
But I think I would probably need the researcher to be relatable, maybe like to have built some really strong rapport before I would share something confidential.
Okay. So you won't even consider, thank you, Adrian, for sharing. So you won't even consider sharing anything until you feel like, can I relate to this person? You know,
Hmm.
will this part, are there things that uh, I can share or I can understand or I can feel the person? And then I will consider sharing something. So relatability is something you'd want to do. Here, I'm going to read a few more answers that came in. Thank you, Adrian. That's helpful. Jennifer, you're saying, I would need to be interested in the purpose of the study. I would need to build a relationship, even minorly at the start. Yes. So, Jennifer, you're saying that I want to know why. Why are you doing this? And could you just have some way of doing this through a relationship, even if it's a minimal effort at it, but I still need that to begin a conversation. I wouldn't be able to begin a conversation. So if this person came with a detached version of themselves, like I am the researcher, I'm here to collect data, give me data, human, you're not going to respond well to that because you're saying I'm a relational being and I need to know a little bit more. Gabriel, you're saying to find something in common with the researcher, nationality, gender, profession. Yes. So what I hear you say here as well is that, will you get me? Will you get me? Because I come from some of these identities and I need to know that we have something in common in across these identities. Otherwise, I'm not confident that you're going to get me, you know? Cameron, you're saying report clear understanding what the researcher is going to do with what I'm sharing. Absolutely. So, Cameron, I want to share this story with you. When I was a doc student, I had a colleague of mine select me as a participant for her study. She wanted to know how international students work on dissertations that require very sophisticated language use, and wanted to and especially if their mother tongue is not English. So I was one of the participants in the study. She never had me member check anything. So I never got a chance to see what she had said about me. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a writing retreat and there's a professor that is common to us all, sits there and she's reading my writing for something completely different. And she looks at me and she goes, "Hi, Maya." That was my pseudonym I chose. She could tell that it was me from my person, from the researcher's description. So the description that she had used was, Maya is a graduate student from India. She is a qualitative research consultant at the College of Education in a large southern university. How many of those types of people were there that would fit the description? One. Exactly, Christopher. One. One. That is it. So I was mortified because you know what I said in that? I was like complaining about my advisor, which we do as graduate students for whatever reasons. Some of us have a little love-hate relationships with our advisor. I was saying things like, she doesn't have time to give me feedback. She's not giving me feedback. I can't get an appointment with her. I try to pretend to accidentally run into her in the hallway right in front of her office because I hang out there all the time. I'm saying all of this. And I can't even make too much of a fuss about it as a graduate student, because then if I make fuss about it, everybody will know Kakali is going and complaining about this student, and then everybody will go and look at that study. So that study now exists. I can't tell you anymore, but that study now exists, and I am hella vulnerable, and if my former advisor, who is very kind to me now, has nominated me for alumni awards and I've gotten them and everything, but it's in writing somewhere that there is a Maya that said these things about their advisor. But in graduate school, you have these moments of stress and tension, and you're going to say these things, if you were offered confidentiality. So yes, absolutely, so important to know what they're going to do and how they're going to share. um, Dr. Burton Jones said, assurance that they will not breach my confidentiality. Yes, goes towards what I just said. Sheila, you're saying I would have to know how the information would be shared or how I would be presented. Yes, I would be willing to share more if they share the same about themselves. Okay, so now, Jennifer, you're getting into these spaces that are critical and feminist spaces, where there isn't just like one way extract information from the participant. It's I am genuinely interested in being vulnerable with you when I'm making you vulnerable, so that goes towards power sharing that you're doing. And it also goes towards my own orientation to doing decolonizing work. So just to kind of give you a background, if you haven't picked up Linda Tuihai Smith's book on decolonizing methodologies, for those of you who are graduate students, please pick it up. She is a Maori indigenous scholar, and even though you're not Maori, it's if you're not Maori, you will find that the way she thinks about research as a colonizing enterprise is very helpful, and it crosses boundaries. And that's the other thing I want to say about good work. Like, you can have work that is super situated in a cultural context. And so what happens when it's situated in a specific cultural context? The cultural insiders could be like going, yes, I get seen and validated and legitimized and understood and documented in ways that mainstream is not documenting these events and these histories. But cultural outsiders, if it's really well situated, will also find interconnectivity with the work. They will do the work of interconnectivity because things will cross over. This is how people, when they read a Gloria Letson-Billings work, things cross over, even if you're not in the same cultural group as Gloria Letson-Billings or a Maya Angelou or a Gloria Anzaldúa. Good work crosses boundaries. It just does different things for different groups, but it will cross boundaries. So later on, when we come to the objections of positionality, and when people say you have an agenda, we can do some back and forth on that, so that you know how to respond to it when people say, ooh, this is too this and too that and too much agenda, or you sound angry, all of those things. We can address those as well. um, so in that context, there is an understanding that research is a colonizing enterprise, and then participants are seen as data repositories from whom you extract. Some of the language that we unconsciously use around this is capture. We capture the voice of the participant, we give the participants the voice. Well, what will you do after you capture? And I'm guilty of that. I'm not moving myself out of this space and shading other folks. I'm equally deserving of the shade too. But when we say capture, it comes from our colonial training. Like, you want to go and like gather things from other folks for your own use, and you want to then, like, appropriate it and use it for your advancement, your whatever the advancement thing is. And in research world, that's your academic advancement. So you're capturing this, and then this giving voice is also another sort of benevolent sort of posturing. I'm saving them from these conditions by giving them voice. But folks have always been caught talking. You just didn't know how to listen. People have been talking. So I'm not a voice bank. It's not like I have amounts of voice to give out and loan to people. I can amplify certain voices because I have positions where those voices are not always present, and I can use my position and privilege to leverage a way to amplify certain voices. But I'm not giving anybody voice. They all have voice. I'm honoring them, but I'm not giving them voice. So these are just cute. It feels like I'm playing semantic games, but I'm not. I'm playing mind. I am trying to alter mindsets. It's a mindset to think that you can give somebody voice, or you can capture their voice. Why does this voice have to be captive? You're captive. And this is a lot of this type of languages in research, because the folks that were making this up with colonial thinking. and therefore it comes into language, basically. So Linda Tuyai Smith's work, you will find that she really unpacks that. And so if you unpack that, that means you have to unpack how you see participants in relationship with you. So participants cannot be seen as somebody with whom you're just engaging in a relationship to get data from them. It has to be much more, it has to be presented with much more dignity, than data givers, data containers, data buckets. They are your fellow human being. They should be treated as you would treat any other fellow human being, family member, with dignity and respect. And this usually becomes much clearer if you ever become a participant in a study. Then you begin to realize, like, oh, that felt dirty, or that didn't feel right, or so I think that this understanding that, Jennifer, you're saying, share more if they're willing to share about themselves, sort of can be extended to critical, and feminist and decolonial spaces, anything that wants to interrogate, the status quo. And the status quo is that, I come in, you've signed this consent form, you're going to answer these questions, and I'm going to check with you, you're going to agree that I got the transcription right, and off I go to write about you, and that's the status quo. But if you look at the history of things, you're going to know that many communities, minoritized communities, have been hurt by signing paperwork, you know? So this status quo thing that comes with consent form is just for universities IRB so they won't get sued. Your ethics for engaging participants, have to be way higher than universities status quo. And so I share this to sort of extend Jennifer's uh, comment here to kind of, say that the positionality you have on ethics is really important, because that helps in how you engage the participants, and that helps in what the participant will share with you. Third party confidentiality agreement. I'm not sure what third party means, but definitely the researcher should be able to offer some confidentiality, and definitely not have details that get you straight to the participants. So when you are anonymizing the institution, let's say you're Florida State University, and you're anonymizing it by saying, a institution in the southern state of US, most people reading this with your name on it will pretty much be able to figure out which one it is. They'll know that it's the institution that you're in, even if you anonymize it, they'll know it. And then people that are close to the person that you have, discussed them as participants will probably be able to figure it out if you have identifying details, even if you created some pseudonyms and stuff. So you're going to have to do more fictionalization other than the pseudonym of the person, because like in my situation, if she had just said that Maya is a graduate student from an Asian country studying social science in a social science field, now this is not recognizable anymore. Did it take away something? Maybe, but did people need to know that I was from India? Because that comes at a harm, to me. But if you have a positionality on it that your ethics has to be higher than IRB, then you're going to frame it completely differently. So you do end up fictionalizing a lot of identifiable details, and if you feel like, oh my God, that's just stretching the truth so far out, what you need to trump that with is the truth of doing no harm. The value that you want to be lined up with is that you don't want to do anybody any harm for your academic advancement. So if that makes somebody say, well, now that's not trustworthy because you fictionalize too much detail, you're like, okay, don't believe me then, but I'm not going to cause harm. Just don't believe me. You don't want to believe me, you can't make anybody believe you anyway. You can do a qual study and say, I have done 500 different things for due diligence, and people could still think your study shit. So you can't make people believe you. So it really is just like your own anchoring in your work. And when the work goes out in the world, people are going to interact with it how they're going to interact with it. But your anchoring is, I will do no harm. I will do no harm to the people who are helping me in my academic advancement. That has to be a primary anchoring. Or if you were in Star Trek, it's your prime directive, you know? All right, moving on from Jennifer. Christopher, you said understanding the use and purpose in collecting the information. Yes, very much so. I would actually go the other route. I would prefer that we don't know each other and that we have no relationship prior, so that it does not impact on our relationship. Good point, Alex. Let me unpack that a little bit. This speaks to insider outsider research. So when we have insider research and you're really familiar with people, there's a lot of benefit to that. However, sometimes what happens is that unless you're aware of how that plays into the research participant dynamics, it can get a little messy. So for example, like if I have a somewhat of an insider relationship with Dr. Bertrand Jones, because we're both faculty of color in Florida, and she says to me, you know what I mean, and I'm nodding my head and saying, yes, I know what she means, but it's not nowhere in the data. It's not in the data because we have the shared understanding. We nodded our head. So when I go back to report it, I can't say I knew what she meant, because I just nodded the head. I knew what she meant. I think I knew what she meant. She never articulated it, nor did I. I don't know if that's what she meant, but I'm going to assume that's what she meant. So there's that too much familiarity can make you like not go for some of the details. However, on the flip side of things, that familiarity could also help people open up to you in ways that they wouldn't open up to somebody that they don't know. So you're going to have to find the balance of that to make sure that, that whatever it is that you're doing, you are staying present with the participant to unpack what they're saying versus relying on the familiarity with the participant. The familiarity will take you somewhere. Of course, it'll take you somewhere, but you still have to kind of, what I call it is look at it with an eye of curiosity, like with a curious sensibility, so you can ask questions, so think about it as a beginner's mind, you're curious about it, like as if, and not to infantilize anybody, but it's like a childlike curiosity. Like don't take anything for granted, even if you know what they're saying, have some curiosity about it to say, what happens if I want to ask a little bit more about this? I think I know what she's saying, but could I ask her a little bit more about this? So I would do that. And then a caveat to that is, if you are a cultural outsider, depending on who you are to the study, you want to make sure that you're not exploiting the population that have invited you. So that's another positionality issue to make sure to be aware of. Kate, you said to get a sense of their professionalism and integrity and respect for me as a participant and intersections leading up to that. Yes, I would need them to know what is their level of investment in this work. Yeah, they need to have skin in the game. Yes. And then same as Dr. Small, also guarantee my data will be handled well. As researchers, can we truly offer confidentiality to our participants? No, not always. This is difficult because, you can't always do that, because even if I say like I'm offering confidentiality and I don't have full on identifiable details, somebody could still identify the person. So you'd have to make them aware that you're going to do everything in your power to keep and preserve the confidentiality, but it's not 100%. All right, back to sharing screen again. Thank you for that. So what I want to say is that in these spaces that you have positionality, they really stem from philosophies of inquiry, and qualitative research is driven by different philosophies of inquiry than quantitative research is. So that means your meaning making, your worldview, way you understand rationality, way you understand truth would be different from those who might be situated in another type of inquiry, quantitative mixed methods, than who are in qualitative inquiry. So a lot of times it's important to have those philosophies of inquiry grounded, so then you can argue from the place of that philosophy of inquiry. And then this may be something that the faculty in here will know, but for the graduate students, if you need a little bit of clarity, the purpose of qualitative research is not to generalize. And that sometimes becomes the question people ask: why is your sample size so small? Well, if your sample size is even 500, if you created that sample size through convenient, purposeful sampling, you still can't generalize. So it's not the number that matters. It matters how in depth you can go to develop critical insights that wouldn't have been possible in any other manner. So there's a type of qualitative research that's interpretive, that you can use to do descriptive type of study. You want to describe and understand. Then critical work in qualitative research is usually to interrogate. So it interrogates structured systems, conditions that produce certain types of experiences. And then there are things that go into deconstruction, where it assumes that nothing is stable, everything can be broken down. What feels like a truth is standing on a set of assumptions, set of structures, everything can be broken down. If I date myself, I would say it's people in that space is like hammer time all the time, you know? So God hammer, I'm gonna go break down everything. And then there is this question mark thing that can be a mix of all things, or that can be something you are developing that doesn't fit any one label, but has bits and pieces of other things that could be part of qualitative research. So in doing this discussion with you guys, where you pointed out like what would you need, from somebody, what all of you have said, going back to that bias slide that I had, what all of you have said, is you need to know what is the researcher about. You need to know who the researcher is. What is this researcher's position? Why does this researcher care? Is the researcher going to build a relationship with me? Does the researcher have skin in the game? How will the researcher use this information? How much confidentiality can they assure? All of this is grounded in who the researcher is as a person and as a researcher, not separate, but together. And if they came to you robotically and said, tell me this thing that you don't tell everybody and in as much details as you can, you're not going to be interested in saying anything. You just won't. So the researcher's way of being, their presence, their disposition, their personality, their way of being relatable, their way of responding to your, sense of apprehension, all of that matters. And that's the positionality. So for anybody to say that the researcher doesn't have a positionality or shouldn't have a positionality, or that positionality is a problem, don't understand that unless you have established these things that come from you as a researcher, you're not going to get like information that's helpful in qualitative research, which is rich, thick, descriptive narratives. And people need to feel comfortable and assured and experience some relatability to be able to have that. So who you are and your personal viewpoints and agendas play a huge role in how you interact and do qualitative research. So it's not a liability in qualitative research as it is in quantitative research. It is one that requires intellectual honesty, and it's one that requires transparency, one that requires weaving in with all parts of your research, as opposed to like apologizing for it. Sorry, I have subjectivities. Sorry, this research is not objective. Sorry, my subjectivities could have played a role in analyzing the data. Of course, what else would play a role? So this whole thing about where does it show up? Where does positionality show up? And I pretty much put everything and their mother, brother, and sister on the slide. Everywhere. It shows up everywhere. It shows up in your state of being, who you are and how you understand truth and reality. That's ontology. It shows up how you know and process knowledge. It shows up which lens through which you want to look. There's a reason why you want to look at it through a CRT lens versus Black feminist lens versus, a phenomenological lens versus a transnational lens. There's a reason you're drawn to it for some reason. That's your positionality. How you're going to frame your purpose and questions and what literature you're going to review, not free from positionality. You are cognitively filtering certain things as more important than others. Why are you doing that? It's because of who you are, what you want to study, what experience you bring to the table, how you know the world, what is it that you want to do with this work, and in what way this work calls to you. There. And then you have your methodology, methods, ethics, positionality, of course, where it shows up in that space too, and how you represent it and how you justify your research. It shows up everywhere. So if you find that you have to apologize for your positionality, or you're getting people upset with your positionality, then anchor yourself a little bit deeper into it so that you can say that you would be intellectually dishonest if you didn't say that it's embedded throughout your study. You don't have to go and point it out in every single spot over here, but it is embedded. So this is sort of like this maxim that research is not neutral and all research has an agenda, which means that when people tell you that you have an agenda, you should not try to say, oh, no, I don't have an agenda. You say, of course I have an agenda. Why wouldn't I? Everybody has an agenda. The NSF has an agenda. Very broad about it, broadening participation. I have an agenda, and my agenda is this. And of course, if you are doing like critical or justice-oriented work, get even firmer on in your anchoring and say there is inequity in this space. There is lack of freedom for these people in this space. Why wouldn't I have an agenda to interrogate that and neutralize that? Of course, I have an agenda. I'm making that very clear that I have an agenda. So I was going to do this activity, but instead of the activity, I'm going to stop, and I'm looking at the time. So I want to stop and then do some interactive questions and thing, because I don't think the activity is as important as me answering your question more directly. So the activity was I will send the activity to Dr. Burton Jones so that she can give it to you for you to do it on your own time. But I'd rather take questions and talk to you directly with whatever you have. So feel free to come on mic or feel free to come on chat and ask your question. And I see 3 different things that popped up on chat. And then we could do this. Okay. The truth of doing no harm. Do not assume I'm going to generalize is not a focus of qualitative. Nope. Tamara, can you tell that reviewer to that? Yes. So in my qualitative research class, in a data analysis class, a student said to me that, everything sounds great when we're in this classroom in these 4 walls, but when we go out there, it's really hard, and people don't buy into all these things, and we don't always know how to like defend the stuff that we do. And so we did this activity called the asshole fishbowl activity. So basically I curated all the questions people get asked, and I went into the interwebs and I asked all the people, and all the people told me all the questions that they asked, that are the most bizarre questions. And I curated it on a Google Doc, and then I asked the students to number, like I numbered it, and they called out a number 59, and I read whatever it is, and we gave like an answer that is an unfiltered answer, and then we gave the real answer, like not real, we gave the real answer first, and then we gave like academically languaged answer. So ask me anything. Everything is fair and free for all. If you want to ask me something beyond this presentation, feel free to ask me that. It doesn't have to be bounded by this. Whatever you need to ask me on chat, ask me on anyway. Would you speak to descriptive versus interpretive analysis and writing discussion section versus interpretation analysis? Yeah, so Sophia, that language comes from more like traditional phenomenological work, the description and interpretation. And that separation is a really hard separation, because I don't think description is free from interpretation, because description has an element of interpretation. So it becomes very difficult to fully mark that, and I've always felt very uncomfortable with it. So when I guide students in that space, I don't say to make a claim that description is devoid of interpretation, but I just if people are offering descriptive details, it's a form of interpretation. And then if they are doing like more analytic interpretation, it's deepening the interpretation to another layer. And so that's how I I tell people to write it, because I don't necessarily, I don't know how to make a distinction when I do think that there is interpretation and analysis embedded in description as well. Does that answer your question? I'm assuming that does. Maybe she's typing. Okay, ask me something else. In writing your positionality, do you feel you focus more on the negative or positives of your subjectivity? I recognize both are valid, but it seems we hear more about writing how you defend rather than celebrate yourself. What is your writing approach? Okay, so in writing your positionality, I write it like a narrative of critical milestones in my life that brought me to the particular study, like brought me to a certain worldview of the particular study. So my goal is that if somebody were to read it, even if they disagreed with maybe the final outcome of it, can they follow my logical progression? That if this was my worldview, then it makes sense that I would come to this position, you know? So for example, in my own work, like I have a transnational feminist orientation, you know? So I'm quick to see gender stuff and patriarchy stuff very quickly, you know, and racist stuff very quickly. So when my participants who were graduate students from India didn't see it that way because they didn't experience those things in India, especially in terms of race, I was, you know, but I did in my positionality, I wanted to make sure that I explained that I have a sense of who I am and this is how I look at the world. And by the time when and I didn't nullify theirs, nor did I nullify mine, then this was fine. You know, then so my worldview of writing subjectivity statements is help people understand, you know, who you are and how you make certain inferences. You know, why would you be making certain inferences? So it's not like celebrating or not celebrating. It's like the narrative of you. You know, like if the researcher were to be a participant and make themselves vulnerable and create their own participant discretion, then the narrative were to be you. Okay, so Sophia, you're asking how do I do a thematic analysis? So if you're going to do a thematic analysis, you're going to have to also understand that analysis through what is your theoretical framework, what is your epistemological framework, what is your methodological framework, and those things come to play. So usually if I'm doing straightforward thematic analysis, I would first code, but my coding is informed by my research purpose questions, literature review, subjectivity, and various theoretical, you know, leanings. And then I would take the codes and I would categorize them. So, you know, semantic units of codes that are similar in meaning for some reason. And I would put some descriptive label on the categories. And then I would look for patterns within and across categories and find what are some stable patterns that I can use as themes. So that's how I would identify the theme. Once I identify the theme, I would then write a narrative around that theme, which is going to be breaking that theme down into its parts and use, you know, evidence collect to analysis that I did. So that would be my process. If I'm missing something, asking, yeah, please ask in voice.
You broke up a little bit.
Oh,
I think
sorry.
as you were getting to the good part. And so you had just talked about the themes, identifying the themes?
Yeah. So I identify the themes by looking at patterns within the categories and across the categories to see what is a stable, sustainable pattern, you know? So even with even with idiosyncrasies and human beings being human beings and all of their complexities, are there certain patterns that stand stable within and across categories? When they do stand stable within and across categories, then I would use the themes. Usually they appear to be, like a sort of like a newspaper headline. And so I would use the themes then as a heading, and then I would create a narrative around the theme. So I would unpack what the theme means using the categories that inform the theme. And then as I'm unpacking it, I would bring in, evidence from whatever data sources that are, part of constructing the theme from the data. I would bring in those data sources to defend, whatever the theme is that I have created.
I think sometimes we water down our themes, and so they don't hold up to what you mentioned in terms of the stable patterns within and across. And so
Yeah.
the themes are thick, they're meaty. They're not
Yeah.
just one code or one node
Yes.
or
Yes. Yes, and a lot of times people jump from code to themes, or if something repeated, they just think it's a theme. And I want to caution you against that. Just because something repeats, somebody repeats something in conversation with you doesn't always make it a theme. It could be because they're avoiding saying something else, and this is a filler thing that they're saying to you. So you have to have some intuitive skills too, and some discerning skills to know what is behind this, and see if you can dig that out. So it's always a good idea to do some preliminary analysis in between collecting data, so you know what to dig for when you are going to a second round of interviews. And for some studies, thematic analysis is not the analysis. There are other types of analysis that you would do that's not thematic, and that could be narrative, that could be something creative. And if you want to be very out there, it could even be something spiritual or connected, all of it together. So there's a variety of ways that you can analyze, but the most important part is to have a sense of what your process is and be able to justify the process. And if you need to make something up, by all means make it up.
Can you tell us what you mean a little bit? I think I know what you mean, but I don't want to assume what you mean by making that up. Can you tell us a
Yes.
bit more about that?
So a few years ago, I took some mixed medium arts classes. I just took it for fun. And as I was doing this mixed medium art classes, I began to realize that this is a way of knowing too. Like as I was doing this, I was asking questions about, like, what do I want to do here? How do I want to do there? Why do I want to do here? And there were many different techniques that the instructor was offering. And I'm like, this certainly is very analytical. These techniques are very analytical. And I'm like, could we not analyze our data like this? And then next thing I know, I did an interview study with students who were in my class. And then I started using this mixed medium analytic technique that I learned from an art teacher, with interviews and conversations and relationships I had with the participants. And it turned out into a big art study. I have some publications on that. And this wasn't anywhere out there. Like it wasn't in a book out there that I needed it. But I knew that that was a way of my knowing. That was a way of my interpreting the information. And once I had a little bit of insight into this type of epistemological orientation through art, I'm like, I should be able to do this with data too in qualitative research. This is the problem. My brain's on all the time on qual. I'm on qual full time on qual. Not good, but I am. But yes, so I then got to and then I ended up doing the work that was not anywhere, and ended up publishing it because I knew that that might be helpful for somebody to say, like, okay, I may not make up those steps, but it gives me permission to cultivate a structure of inquiry and analysis that makes sense for my work, but that's not exactly a fit with what's out there. And that would happen. And especially when you're doing any kind of justice oriented work and you're trying to disrupt the way of knowing from a dominant perspective, then your way of knowing has to look different. Your methodology will look different. Your methods of data collection would look different. Your way of representing data would look different. You can't say I'm disrupting a structure of inquiry that is violent and exploitative, but then your structure of inquiry is going to remain the same anyway. Those two things don't go together. So your stuff will change. I know Cameron and Eric are not here. Sophia is saying, would you speak to intercultural or interracial intercoder reliability? Well, I don't really line up with intercoder reliability because it comes from a positivist thinking of qualitative research. And that's not really the philosophies of inquiry of qualitative research. The philosophies of inquiry of qualitative research is not going to silence somebody's way of knowing versus somebody else's way of knowing. So if Tamara and I looked at the same data and she saw anti-Blackness in it and I didn't see anti-Blackness in it, I'm not going to say that the difference in our intercoder reliability is, going to make the study not good, or it compromise the goodness of the study. Because the reason it didn't is because we would construct meaning about it differently, because I don't live in a Black woman's body and I might not see things as readily and saliently as she would see it. So it has a lot of element of doing harm, but it gets used a lot in spaces like grant applications, the intercoder reliability stuff, to create an illusion of rigor. But I don't think that it really does rigor. I think it plays to a status quo. I just don't think it does rigor because it actually goes against what we would do, what we would honor as qualitative researchers. Now, if Tamara and I sat around and we talked about why we saw this differently and why it's so salient to her, and we put that together as a finding of the study because we are studying the violence of invisibility of anti-Blackness, that has value. But what doesn't have value is if we didn't have the same interpretation, that we would just say the study is not good because our coding was different. Our coding reflects our own positionality and our experiences and our training and our worldview and our epistemologies. And it wouldn't be ethical to silence one's epistemology and privilege another. And if we couldn't all come to a degree of sameness, then we don't have a good study. So we're not coming to that. This degree of sameness is coming from a positivist understanding that all roads lead to one truth. And that's not the philosophy of inquiry for qualitative research. We don't need all roads to go to one truth. We're comfortable with complexity and multiplicities, and contradictions. We can hold tensions. Qualitative research often will point out tensions in data. You can have findings full of tensions, because that's how people live. The value of people's lives are full of multiplicity, complexities, and tensions, and not sterilized to one thing. So yeah, so I would say that for me, I see it as a move for grants, but I don't see it aligned with the philosophies of inquiry for qualitative research.
Ooh, yes. You just highlighted the tension of my life in having a large grant project where we've collected multiple years of data, and we have calculated our inter-rater reliability, and but also recognize that our positionalities contribute so much to even just that consensus building process. And so we've battled with ourselves back and forth of, do we report this? Do we not report this? And we've also had to be strategic in, I think, in working with our colleagues, as well as in thinking about, when do we report this and how much detail do we provide? So it's a whole nother, that's a whole another R3, I think.
That is, and strategic is probably the best way to describe that, because you know that there's going to be complicity in doing that work. Are you comfortable with giving them an iterator reliability if the outcome of how the money and where the research is going fills a bigger goal for you? Then you know what, I'll do a chart for you. You want to take the chart, give me my millions. Because I am more invested in what the money can do. So I sometimes you might want to concede to a complicity because it gives a bigger goal, and other times it might feel so yuck that you're like, I can't go to sleep at night because of this complicity. And everybody's line is different on that.
Mhm.
Everybody's line is different on that. So you'll have to figure out if you want to, like I just applied for a grant and I didn't quite say intercoder reliability because it just made me squirm. But I said that we would discuss similarities and differences in our interpretation of data. That's how I said it. I did not use intercoder reliability, but I knew they would be looking for something like that. I'm like, okay, I'll give you this, but I can't cross the full line and go to this other side, so I didn't. But I think that's important to understand, like, what exactly are you working for and where is your line that you want to cross and you don't want to cross. Yeah.
And I think that that actually brings us, to me, right back to the beginning in talking about positionality and bias, and where are our lines as researchers?
Yeah.
What are our responsibilities? Where do we feel comfortable? Where are those boundaries that we feel we cannot cross, whether
Yeah.
within ourselves or with our participants?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are over time.
Yeah.
But I have appreciated this discussion so much, and you just made me even more excited to teach Introduction to Qualitative Research spring. So I'm really excited about that. I hope y'all are ready for this ride we're about to go on in the spring. For those of you that are taking it, would you please join me in thanking Dr. Bhattacharya for her time this afternoon? If you have additional questions, she is definitely responsive on social media. She gave you her Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handles. So feel free to reach out to her, or hashtag #QualLove. Thank you for being here with us and sharing this perspective. I appreciate these R3s because it offers us an opportunity to hear different scholars' perspectives and how they approach the work. And I think it's great for our students to hear, so that they then can process this information, synthesize it, and come up with their own positionality, so that they can defend that as they move forward.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. This was an honor.
Thank you. Hopefully you will come back, and we will probably have many opportunities for you to come back, and you can join me anytime in the spring. Not
Yes.
have a whole lot of time, but you can join me anytime.
Yes.
Introduction to Qualitative Research.
Well, double team, double trouble.
There we go. Double trouble. Good trouble though. Good trouble.
Good trouble.